about a few of them. So if you can see, with two of these open. Okay. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so here's one of here's an example. Actually, it was in a recent week video in the weekly series. So here's kind of the premise of a model like this. Is you can see that, and this is one of my favorite tricks that involves using what I use here is so we see that we've got a dates table. We've got this is Hong Kong vessel data, which is available online. So this is, I kind of collected this and used this as the data. And we see that we've got one solid line in our model, and then we've got this dotted line. And so the solid line's the active one, and the dotted line is the one that's not active. So in order to make this active, if I want to use this dates table, it's very helpful to have data that a dates table in a model. So in order to make that usable, what I do is I use the used relationship on on this dotted line. To use relationship is really helpful in this example. And some other way. And in more recent versions, so what we have here, so if we look at these different measures, and I'll have to go into this view. So these measures here we've got for the arrivals. So this I'm counting the number of vessels, and then for the departures, what I actually do is essentially this is the calculate function. I'm going to add the used relationship as the filter in the second part of the calculate function. So this is the filter before I aggregate. And what I'm doing is I'm activating the relationship between the departure date and the date. So we've got two active relationships. Essentially, this makes the dotted line active. So then the idea with this is that I can take a date and I can get the number of arrivals and departures. So it changes the way, the context in which Power BI evaluates the measure results. So this is use relationships. You don't have to use it with every model. It's really helpful with examples like supply chain, with with anything that say you run a warehouse and you're counting the number of goods that come in and out, and you want to be able to use that same date table. So this is one way to do it, is using used relationships. So another one of my favorite so this is an example of a DAX function I find super useful. Another example of something that I also find really helpful is if I look at so we have for our model, and when we look at, if we look at the number of, so let's say we want to monitor the number of boats that come in and out. So one visual that I really like using is some of the preview features. There's some really neat options to check out. So if you go into the options and settings, I'm going to show the preview features. By the way, if you're using an older version of Power BI Desktop, like the one for report server, this isn't available. So if we go into the preview features, and I've enabled everything. So a few of my favorites here are the shape map visual. The Azure map visuals, really good. I haven't really had much of, I haven't really had a need to use Spanish language support for Q&A, and I don't connect to analysis services models that often right now. The modern visual tooltips, that lets you kind of use something other than the default option. And I also really like the Sparklines and the field parameters are some of my favorites. So I've enabled everything, so I already set that up. So the way that something like Sparklines works is it will let me essentially, if I look at, I'm going to kind of look at a category. So I'll say that I want to get the next ports. And if we want to kind of count the numbers that count the number of boats that are going to these destinations at their next port, one way we can do this is we can add a sparkline. So what I'm going to choose is I'm going to take the departures, and actually I'm just going to count them. So I'll get the vessel name, and I'll just choose the count option. And so some of them may not have one of them, but you can see how these stack up. So I actually rank them to see which ones come next. So if I want to add a sparkline, I just click on the field that I want to use as the measure for, or the measure or the aggregate field for the sparkline, choose add sparkline. And now so on the y-axis, I'm going to use the vessel count. And I've already got the vessel name as the count, so I can use that. And then I want to choose the field that I want to use for this. And I'm going to actually use, in the data, I'm going to use the departure date as this example. And the reason that I do this instead of using the option for use relationship is because I don't want to accidentally kind of mix those up. So if I choose create, we see that we get this little sparkline. And so this is an example of something that maybe doesn't, we can narrow it down. And sometimes what happens if we narrow it down, we'll see a bit more bump. But we can see, this does give us an idea. What these will give us is like little lines. And so you can see at the bottom an example of what that would look like. Another thing that I really like from this recent features list, and I'm going to duplicate the tab to do this, is the field parameters. So I'm going to delete all the other things right here for now. So the field parameters, and so if I choose this, table, right now we've got the date, the start of the week or weekend. But what if we want to take these fields and the date, start of the week, and the week or weekend, and we want to choose which labels we want to use? So previously, if you wanted to do something like this, you kind of have to change the structure of the data. You'd have to essentially unpivot it so that your columns would become a field of their own in the data, and then you would have whatever date label was associated with that. Both field parameters, it's quite a bit easier. So first, make sure to enable the parameters. And say if you don't have it enabled, you won't see this little drop down. You'll just see an option to add the field parameter. And what that does is it will just show the numeric range. So the fields are newer. So in this example, I'm going to call the parameter, let's call this the date label. And then I'm going to just choose every single field to add to this. And I'll choose to add the slicer. Okay, so this adds this slicer, and we can see that, let me stretch this out a bit. So this contains all the fields that we added into it. So actually, this is kind of interesting because it's a lot of it happens behind the scenes. So this creates a table containing the labels that we want to put in the slicer. And if we go into our data this data view, you can see what those labels look like. And it doesn't really, I wouldn't worry too much about what this table looks like, and be more excited about what it does. So for this existing visual, right now I've got the first few columns are these dates. So if I want to change this, I can do, what I instead will want to do is I can just add the date label to the columns. And then I'm going to remove the other fields so that I have a date label, and then I have the arrivals and departures. And so right now we see like a whole bunch of fields, and the reason is because we don't have anything selected. So if we choose the date, we can see that now we only see the date in these row labels. And then, right, we can also change this the day of the month, and we want to change the formatting for this one. And let's say for this example, and this is interesting because I haven't really used numeric inputs for this, is let's just make this 0. And see, in order to update what we see in the field parameters, we'd want to do that in the field that we're initially feeding into the slicer itself. So I'm going to choose the day of the week. We can see how this adjusts. And one thing that we see with the day of the week is if you notice that this is out of order. So one really helpful trick that I use all the time is if I'm trying to order a date field. So in particular, so let's look at the date table. So here I have 8 days worth of data. And if we look at some of these are dates themselves, which means they're going to be ordered. The day of the month is also going to make the order in which it appears is the order in which we want it to appear. But if we look at the day of the week, this is alphabetical, so this doesn't make a huge amount of sense to do. So in order to update this, the easiest way to do that is we can look at what we want to do is we want to create a comparable field to use as the, and we could do the same for the month name, but we only have June in this example, so that's not really, an important part of this. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back into my data. And right, so we see these different number of we've got these different fields, and I don't know why this is doing this. I think so I see. I've actually never seen this message before. Okay, see if I'll retry this. Okay, so one way one way to easily do this is if I want to order the day of the week by the actual order in which it appears. So we expect, if you're using the, depending on which calendar you're using, you want to see Sunday as the first day or Monday as the first day. And you don't want to see Wednesday as the last day of the week, no matter the order in which they appear alphabetically isn't the order in which the days of the week occur. So to run the way around that is choose a custom column. And I'm going to then, I'm going to call this the day of the week number. And say date, that's the day of the week. And so there's 2 options here, but previously I choose in day of the week name. This time I want to choose the day of the week instead, which is going to return a number. And I'll reference the date. And now, so here's another thing you can do within Power Query is, and sometimes I don't know, sometimes I'm careful about suggesting using M because M doesn't work in all the refresh situations. Sometimes it's really slow if you load it into like Power BI service. So, but this is a technique that I've used to kind of save a bit of space. Instead of changing the type as a single step, I'm just going to add number.type, and this is going to change the data type within that single step. So now we see that we've got the day of the week number, starts at 0, goes through 6 because it's a 0-based index, and then
sorry, Helen, to interrupt. I think you just share your Power BI desktop and you are working on the Power Query, and we didn't see that.
Okay, well, let me just load this, and then I will actually kind of show. I'll put in the comments how to do something like that.
Oh, okay. Or you can change the sharing of your screen and share everything. It's up to you. Whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got others. I've got some other things open. I'm just trying to.
Okay.
I didn't realize that Power Query. Sometimes Power Query shows up, and sometimes I think it depends on the application.
Yeah.
So, but now we can see if we look right. So everyone can see the screen again now. Is we've got the day of the week number added. So I can then use this to order the day of the week name. So if I choose, so essentially I want to choose the column that I want to order, and I choose sort by the column. So then I'm going to refer to the day of the week number as what I want to sort this alphabetical column by. So then I go into Power BI. You can see that we have these actually in the order of the order that they appear, and we can then you see that we can change these date labels, and it impacts what we see in the visual accordingly. And then weekday and weekend, same thing. And one thing with this as well is that there's different ways we can calculate this. And to some extent, I'd say if you look at this and you think, okay, well, there's obviously more, more boats that are coming in the weekdays, but there's also 2.5 times more weekdays than there are weekends. So it's not necessarily, that's not necessarily a measure or a metric we would want to use there. So it's kind of the context in which we're using it. It's sort of like the joke about, why do employees, why do some of these employees, why do 20% of them take off Friday? Well, like Friday is 20% of the total days of the week. So the field parameters are really helpful. So I think they're quite fun to play. And obviously, you don't want to put, tons of, a ton of. I wouldn't necessarily put all the labels in here, but I just added them to show what they look like. So, for example, I don't think the month name makes a huge difference here, because the reason these are blank, by the way, is because some of the boats stay in port a long time. So if we have the month name that, there's really only June. So it really just depends on, if you're looking at a June number, it may not make sense to put that in there to start with, but I did want to show what that looks like. So there's a few different tricks. So given there's not a huge number of people on the call, I'd love to meet, I'd love to kind of answer questions and have a, more discussion around Power BI.
Okay.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
I have a question regarding your first part of your presentation. At the beginning, you talked about the user relationship. One of my friends raised a question some days ago, something similar to this, but she wanted to. She had 3 different date fields, the same as what you described, and she wanted to change the relationships between these dates. But the issue is that when we want to use the user relationship in a table, we should show the sum, or for example, the count of numbers, in our measures. What if we want to use only the exact numbers? For example, we have 3 orders in, for example, 12th of June, 5 orders in 13th, and so on and so forth. And we want to see all the records separately in different lines, not only the sum of all these numbers. Is there any solution to have?
Well, I say one way around that is you would add, right? So this is where things like an index, or if you have a unique ID, like if we've got, say, an order number, you would want to put that, you would want to, I would say the way that I would approach this, I would add a unique ID to that. So add the order number, because the the table itself, the aggregation depends on the dimensions that you add to the table. So if you've just got, if it's aggregated right to the date level, then you'd want to essentially add that field that you want, you want to break it down by to the visual table that you're using. So you want to expand the context in which we're evaluating it, because you're adding a dimension that has a row label for each of those items, for example.
Okay, thank you. So we should have an ID for each column, and then
just an ID for each item, right? You want to have a unique ID, not for each column, just the column you're adding for each row.
Instead of bringing the measure, for example, the count of numbers or sum of the numbers, we should bring in the exact, for example, the sales field into the table, correct?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what that looks like without seeing the data. But I would, well, as far as you'd probably want to include a count. You'd also, the other thing is sometimes they'll kind of trick it into doing other things. So for example, you could add the data itself, or you could add the data itself as the measure. So you would have the date, you'd have the item, you'd have the date that you're doing that over. You add one of the sides of the dates, and then you get the other side. But then the other thing is that for that is what, there's more than one way to do something. Sometimes you don't necessarily, sometimes it may be worth combining the tables together, because if you don't have a massive data set, sometimes that will work better. It'll make more sense. And there's rules that you can follow, and there's always, reasons you can break the rules.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. One of my friends asked a question, and that was about how do you know a course, because you are instructor of the LinkedIn Learning, you know that area much more than the others. So that person was looking for a course to learn DAX. Do you know a learning I don't know, the course something to learn DAX? Not because there are a million videos on the net on YouTube, but some of them are very professional. But for the beginner, what do you recommend to start? Which course?
So Jenny Von Corder has an intro DAX course. So I have a course that focuses on DAX, but it's kind of a more advanced DAX.
No.
Jenny Von Corder has one that's good, that's really helpful.
Okay, that's on the LinkedIn Learning? Okay, perfect. Is there any other question from people on the chat? Okay, so
please
it
ask
seems
them.
No question in that case. Perfect. Okay.
Really, thank you, Helen. I learned some new tips and tricks. Really appreciate for having you today.
Yeah, and in sense, it's a bit of, I'm actually working on a course right now, and so trying to get some of that. I have quite a few deadlines to do for that. But in terms of, so I would say like a lot of the mapping options are, I really like using those. So another option is there's calendar setup that I really like using. Sometimes that's helpful with like, okay, you're looking at a calendar. It's much easier to look at it with like, this looks like a calendar. And I can share an option for that. I see when I published this one. I actually have another one I can use too. One second, I'm just finding the version, and I can share that. One second, my computer, I don't know what's going on my computer. I think it might be also internet issues. Yeah, just add to the list of stuff to do. What other questions do people have in the meantime? So the other thing is like some of this is if you're interested in learning more about it, I do post quite a bit of it on LinkedIn, and then I also have links to some of the courses. The stuff I post on LinkedIn is kind of this high level overview. So sometimes it's it's just like a snapshot of what's going on. One area that I think is really the area that I like, and I cover this, I actually have a newsletter as well, and so some of the mapping options are really neat. Actually, let me see which one. I'm opening a map. I'm opening a map right now. Oh, this one doesn't have a map on it. But I can, however, I'll just kind of share this. One second. And okay. So, and this is something that I did for a client, so I just had to remove some of the stuff. But so here's the calendar, right? This is obviously old because we are not in January anymore. But you see this like little calendar here. This is actually done with a standard matrix visual that I've set up to display the numbers. And then I also didn't want to, if I collapse the calendar, this is something, I don't really want to count the dates here, but I updated it. This is an older version, but we can see these little, like, these are the calendar, and you can change the colors of them. So if you wanted something to be like, say blue and orange scale, like an orange is like, this is a hot day for sales, or this is a hot day for weather or something. You can use the colors to display. I just used the colors to show which ones I had forecast data for. So then if I choose one of these, you can see what this updates. So this is using a bit of DAX on the back end. This is an hourly number. And with this example, this is a great way if you can use, I mentioned the modern tooltips. Another thing you can do with Power BI is you can choose to add a tab you can choose to make a page a tooltip itself. And I'll just show this as an example. So I add a new page, and then if I want to use this tooltip and turn it on, Okay, so this makes it a tooltip size. This is newer, by the way. Previously, it would make a tooltip that was like the same size as the page. So you'd end up kind of having to scale down the visuals so that they fit within this box, because this is the size of the tooltip that appears. So then I'm just going to just add something so you can see how this gets set up. So let's add, let's say, let's see if I can, I'm curious about, okay, so let's see if I can add a this actually drives me mad. Okay. Come on. Okay. And we'll make the background. Let's say like, hello. And I'll then make this like, I'm gonna actually make this a white. See it a bit more. And what is this? For some reason, I want to see this as like red. Okay. So, or maybe this should say like stop, but I'm just going to leave it as hello. And now, if I go back to, so I set that up as a tooltip. So now I can take an existing visual, and right now, so the lines, this is these different lines, and if I don't, this is the standard tooltip. So if I can change this to use the modern tooltip as well. But if I want to set this up, so this is if I go to the general options, the tooltips, tooltips are in this general menu, is I can actually change, I can change so report page, right now it's auto. So what that means is that these are the fields that I've added to this. If I choose page 1 is actually the tooltip. So now hover over this, and I've set up a custom tooltip that I essentially connect to this visual. Now, page 1 is probably not the most specific, so I'll typically label it like, I'll just label this like tooltip, and I'll go to tooltip 1. And then when I look at the summary, it's a little easier to find that. So then if you give this report to someone else, they don't think like, what have you done? So you can see the tooltip 1 appears in the tooltips, and this chart indicates it's a chart. The stop, I wouldn't set something up like that, but I would do something like, okay, here's the weather on that day, and which numbers is this comparing to? I'd probably format the dates and times so they're a little easier to read. So the custom tooltips are also another visual that I like doing. With the calendar, you see that it reset, and we also see that you check like week 4 in the month, or you should be able to. I think it's thinking, but you can see how the calendar, right? What use the calendar would be. You can also change. You could also put with the calendar. The calendar is also a great example of something that would be helpful with tooltip, for example. And if you wanted to display this so that it was, you hover over it, it would give more details, like as to why the color was a certain color, or perhaps like you rank something on a date. So you put a little like column chart or bar chart to give more context to what's going on with the numbers. But yeah, so the calendar's really helpful. It's really helpful. I've used this for a lot of different kind of clients that I've worked with. And this is, you know, calendars are popular visual. There are calendar visuals in the store, but I'm not super crazy about them because some of them have been deprecated, they don't work anymore. And also a lot of companies don't like using custom visuals because of security concerns, because of update concerns. And so this is using just the standard matrix visual, which is something that, you know, it's available right here in the standard visual options.
Perfect.
Any questions on that? Please do ask.
I like this matrix and how you shape it as a calendar. It's really, really interesting. Because I saw people using Deneb to create something like this, but this is the new one. This is the great one. I like it. Yeah.
Well, Deneb's also a custom visual, though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I know that people built out Deneb, but at the same time, Deneb, it remains kind of a custom visual, and it's similar to R. So for people who have worked with R before, you know, there's similarities with it. The only thing is like the amount of work you have to do sometimes to do formatting. It's like, you know, kind of a pain. But Deneb is, you know, essentially, there's a lot more kind of customization options. You know, there's also people that use D3, but D3 is also like, it's a lot of JavaScript.
Yeah, and there is a custom visual for that D3,
yeah.
But I'm not yeah, but that's the developers stopped developing that and update that. I think the name of that is 3D or something like that, DJ3 or something like that. It's with the orange icon.
Oh, no, the D3's update. Who was Mike something was developed the D3. D3 is not specific to Power BI. It's actually you know, it's used in like JavaScript. So I did a JavaScript course and that D3 was part of it. But in order to use D3, you have to know JavaScript. Essentially, you can't get far without knowing JavaScript. And I'm not really crazy about JavaScript. So, I mean, the other thing is if you look at the Python and R visuals, there's something like 900 and something, almost 1,000 packages supported in the R script visual. And that includes, they do have a D3 supported option. So if you wanted to add tooltips, you could potentially do that through R, which would be fewer lines of code than using D3. But then, you know, it does bring this question of like who's updating it, who's responsible for it. And that's actually a question that, you know, comes up, I think, in every company is like, okay, if someone's not getting, if this is, especially if it's something that's offered for free, for example, is that there may not be someone dedicated to doing that. It may be behind of security. It may not work with everything because there isn't, you know, kind of a financial incentive to keep, you know, keep the wheels running, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, so
In the chat too.
So if there is any question, please feel free to raise that.
The other thing that I would do for something like this, and let me say, is I would say, here's one other thing I would add to this. So let me do, so for like the calendar color, one more trick, because I think that I actually did this differently this is an older version, and this is from January. But if we look at the calendar, so you have the calendar days, and then there's the color of the calendar. So, and this one's for you, like, so the calendar, you see, it's white. It's a white, and then it's blue the other days. Sometimes this is a bit harder to see. So something else that done. So if this is, and then, right, so this actually uses this conditional formatting option. So saying, okay, if this count is greater, right, if there's it's going to use 1. Otherwise, right? Otherwise, you have a blank. I'm actually going to change this. I'm going to make this a 3 if that's not the case. So then, if I go into the colors for this, so done. Okay, I don't know why this is taking a long. It might be because I'm sharing too. If I go into these visual options and right, I go to let's see, the values. And by the way, if you feel like you have to find everything, you're not alone. Okay, so we have these colors. So the background color is on, and you see the FX, so this is engaged. So I don't want to clear this, I don't want to turn this off, but rather I'm going to say that if the number is 3, or I can change that, and this is going to, I'll show you what this looks like. So now we
perfect.
have, this is a lot more visible, and I would actually probably make this an even lighter gray, so so you can see it, right? You can distinguish it between the white, and then you can use blue on top. One other thing, I'm curious about what other people use this for, is I typically almost always use a white background. And I don't know if that's because I've had to print out so many things for other people to look at, but I typically use white, but I've seen a lot of people, and I think this might be, you know, depending on what background they're from. If you're a developer, you certainly use things with darker colors, but I almost always use white, which makes it easier to print out for some reason, or to share as a PDF. So, you know, that's something to think about. It's how are people using it? Black backgrounds generally tend to be easier if you're looking at it for a long period of time. That's why control rooms are often of like dark backgrounds. But if you're giving this as a presentation to like an executive board, for example, is that you're typically going to, you're not in a dark room, so the white background is easier to see.
Okay.
This, again, the hellos, like you can see how the tooltip's set up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then last minute questions, and we've been on for an hour. Thanks for having me. Thanks for your patience with getting this started. Running around trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, that's totally okay. And thank you for spending your time with us, sharing your knowledge with us, and it was a great session.